a little tired tonight, but we are back to the deed of Paksenarrion, Sheepfarmer's daughter, Chapter 2. All your personal belongings you turn into the quartermaster. I'll put them in a bag with your name on it and store them in the treasury. We'll issue your training uniforms today, and if you want to keep your old clothes, they'll be stored too. Stammel turned to greet a gnarled, older man whose arms were full of burlap sacks. "Ah, quartermaster. Good to see you." The man glared at the recruits. "Humph. Another bunch of beginners. And how much sentimental trash have they brought to take up space in storage?" "Not so much. We've been on the road 8 days since the last pickup." "Good. I'll need a clerk." "Bosk will do it." Stammel gestured to Bosk, who came forward and took a handful of tags from the quartermaster. "File 1, step up, one at a time, give your name, and hand over your gear." Paksenarrion stepped forward, unbuckling the belt on which her sheathed dagger hung. Bosk had already written out her tag and handed it to the quartermaster, who fastened it to a sack and waited for her contribution. She held out belt, dagger, and the kerchief with her savings, 18 coppers, in it. "Are you going to keep these clothes?" he asked, eyeing her brother's trousers, which had slipped down her hips without the belt. "Yes, sir." "Amazing. Well, go get your uniform and bring your clothes back here. Quickly now." Paksenarrion looked around to see where she should go. Stammel waved her towards a doorway on the left. There, a man and woman presided behind tables heaped with brown clothing. Pax strode quickly across the courtyard, hoping her trousers would stay up. Behind her, she heard Corin's nasty chuckle and whispered comment. When she reached the tables, she saw stacks of plain brown tunics, socks, and low boots. The woman beckoned her and grinned. "You're a tall one, right enough. Let's see." And she began measuring packs with a length of knotted string. Neck to waist, waist to knee, shoulder to elbow to wrist. "Here." She held out a tunic after rummaging in the pile. "This'll do well enough for now. Change." Paksenarrion took the tunic, stripped off her shirt and trousers, and pulled the tunic over her head. The cloth was not as scratchy as the wool she was used to. The sleeves fell just short of her elbows, and the hem almost reached her knees. It felt more like a dress cut short than anything else. "Try these boots," said the woman. Pax put on a pair of the heavy brown socks and eased her feet into the boots. They were short. The woman offered a larger pair. "These fit well enough." "Here's a belt for you, and a sheath. You'll be issued the dagger later." The belt, like everything else, was plain brown. The buckle was iron. Paksenarrion took her old clothes back to the quartermaster, feeling silly with the tunic rippling around her bare thighs. "Ooh, look at the pretty white legs she has." She was sure that mocking whisper was Corin or Jen's, and hated herself for blushing as she handed the clothes to be sacked away. But Stammel heard the whisper too. "Corin," he said, "who told you to talk in ranks?" Pax, returning to her place, dared not look at Corin's face as he replied, "No one, Sergeant. Perhaps you need reminding that you are to do what you're told and nothing else?" "No, sir." Corin did not sound as confident as usual. "But, sir, it's such a pretty sight." "If a pair of legs can make you forget your duty, Corin, you'll have to be better taught. I don't care if the Marshal General of Gerd's Hall in Finn Panrer walks through the line stark naked and tweaks your beard. You pay attention to me and not to her. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." Corin sounded sullen, but "No buts," growled Stammel. In less than an hour, Stammel's group of recruits was outfitted in the recruit uniform. They moved into one of the big barracks rooms, with Bosk and Devlin, another corporal, assigning bunks. "File leaders will rotate from week to week for the first month or so," said Devlin. He was taller and thinner than Bosk, and looked as if he would smile more easily. Right now, he was not smiling at all. "File leaders bunk here, by the door," he went on. "File seconds here, then thirds, fourths, and so on. You'll change your bunk as you change your place in file. Now, each bunk has the same bedding, and this is how you'll make it up." The corporals demonstrated and pulled the bedding apart. "Your turn. Get busy." As the recruits struggled with the bedding, they walked from place to place, explaining and criticizing. The long, straw-stuffed pallet had to be padded into an even rectangle. Muslin sheet stretched tightly over it, and the brown wool blanket folded in one certain way at the foot. Paksenarrion finally achieved an acceptable bunk, and stood beside it waiting for the others to finish. Her legs felt chilly and exposed, and she was hungry. Most of the others looked as uncomfortable as she felt. At last they were all done. Corporal Devlin went to fetch Stammel, and Bosk moved around the room, positioning recruits beside each bunk, ready for inspection. Stammel came to the door. "Ready? Ready for inspection, sir," answered Bosk. Stammel began with the file leaders, checking the bunks first. Then he looked at his recruits, twitching a sleeve into place here, asking about the fit of the boots there. When he had made his way all around the room, he returned to the doorway. "You'll present like this for inspection every morning before breakfast," he said, "and at any other time it's ordered. You'll receive your file positions here when that's changed, so you'll go directly to your file position and formation in the yard. Immediately after an inspection, you'll parade in the yard, and you'll march everywhere in formation, to eat, to drill, to work. You'll have a quarter glass in the morning call to visit the jacks, dress, and make your bunks. I'll expect every one of you to be in place when I come in." He beckoned to Bosk and Devlin and left the room. Most of the group stood still, but a few left their places and started for the door. Bosk returned, and the rash ones halted. "And who told you you were dismissed?" They stared at their feet. "Those of you out of position, stay there. The rest of you are dismissed." Paksenarrion gave silent thanks. She had not moved, and went quickly out to the yard. There she found the other recruit units drawn up in formation, and Stammel waiting. She aligned herself on the others, wondering what was happening to the unfortunates who had been held back. Beside and behind her, the ranks filled. At last they were all in position. The corporals reported to Stammel, and after a moment he glanced at the other surgeons. "Go ahead, Stammel," called someone from far down the row. "Take yours in first." They were marched across the courtyard to a building with windows opening on the yard. Pax could smell cooked meat and bread. There, Stammel sent them in, one file at a time. Once inside, she was urged along by a private who directed her to the serving line. There, she found a stack of bowls, another of trays, and a bin of blunted knives. She took a tray, bowl, spoon, and knife and moved towards the impatient cooks. A dipper of some kind of stew went into the bowl, and a half loaf of bread, hunk of cheese, slab of salt beef, and an apple went on the tray. As she came off the serving line, another private directed her to a table in one corner. Soon, her file was seated along the bench, and the tables were filling in strict order. A cook brought over a large jug of water and a cup to their table. Pax took a tentative bite of stew. To her surprise, it was tasty, savory with onions and vegetables. It had looked like a lot on her tray, but she found herself polishing the bowl with the last of her bread before she knew it. "Well," said Stammel from behind her, "how do you like army food?" "Seems good enough to me, sir," said Sabin from the next table. "You'll eat a lot of it." Stammel moved away. The first night in the barracks, after so many nights on the road, was horrible. It was stuffy, it smelled. Paksenarrion jerked awake several times in alarm, only to find she was safe in her bunk. Someone had walked past the doorway. It was neither as light nor as dark as the roadside, for the dark was thicker, an indoor darkness, and the light was clearly of human origin. Several people snored, and their snores echoed off the stone walls. She missed the comfort of the old shirt she usually slept in. The new night shift she'd been issued was scratchy. "We're civilized," Stammel had said to those who protested against wearing a night shift. "Besides, it'll be cold soon." Pax had scarcely fallen asleep after her last alarm when a terrible clangor broke out. Corporal Devlin with a triangle that announced morning call. Pax rolled out of her bunk and made for the jacks down the corridor, then back to the room to struggle with her bunk. She peeled off the night shift, hoping Corin's eyes were occupied elsewhere. No one said anything. Everyone around her was as busy as she was. She unbraided her hair, combed it with a bone comb she wore looped through it, and rebraided it smoothly, wrapping the tip with a thread from her tunic. She didn't know what to do with the night shift. Bosk came to the door. Pax caught his eye and he came forward. What do we do with these? See that ledge? Fold it neatly and put it there. Bosk went around the room to tell the others. Pax tied her bootlaces, straightened her belt and empty sheath, and smoothed the sheet on her bunk one last time. Devlin came to the door. Ready? He asked Bosk. As they will be. Recruits, prepare for inspection, yelled Devlin. Paksenarrion stood where she thought she should be and stared straight ahead. Stammel entered the room and began on the other side. He found something wrong with each person. Blanket folded wrong, sheet crooked, pallet misshapen, boots laced unevenly, hair uncombed, tunic crooked, night shift folded wrong, dirty fingernails. Pax felt a stab of panic and almost looked at her hands. Untrimmed beard, messy bunk, he was only 2 bunks away, and Pax was sure she could not stand the suspense. Night shift under the bed, weren't you listening, recruit? And then it was her turn. She felt herself begin to blush before he said a word. She heard, she did not look, him thump the bunk. He looked at her from all sides, grunted, and finally said, tunics wrinkled in the back, and walked out. Dismissed, said Bosk, and Paksenarrion headed for the yard, beginning to wonder why she'd gotten into all of this. She wondered even more in the next weeks. She enjoyed the marching drill, which kept them moving around the wide fields and intricate patterns for several hours every morning and evening. It wasn't fighting, but it was soldierly and expected. What she didn't enjoy was the other work. Bed making, cleaning, and dishwashing were among the things she left home to avoid. If she wanted to be a carpenter or mason, she grumbled to herself one day while working on repairs on the stable wall, she'd have apprenticed herself to one. Others felt the same way. We haven't even seen a sword yet, complained Effa. I signed on to be a fighter, not drag rocks around all day. Well, surely we'll get into that, said Sabin, as he hoisted one of the despised rocks into place. I mean, the place isn't full of workers, so they must have become fighters and gone to war. Corin gave a sneering laugh. Fine reasoner you are. No, they'll keep us here as laborers as long as they can, and then try to skimp on our training. As long as they can count on fools like you to join every year, they don't care how many die. Paksenarrion snorted. If we're fools for joining, what about you? The others laughed, and Corin scowled, slamming a rock in a wet mortar so it splattered them all. I, he said, already know how to use a sword. I don't have to worry. You will if you don't get busy, said Bosk. They all wondered how long he'd been listening. The closest they came to anything that Paksenarrion recognized as weapons training was hawk drill. Every day they spent 2 hours with the hawks, weighted wooden cylinders that looked somewhat like maces. I know what you want, said Arms Master Seeker as he supervised the drill. You want swords, and, you think, and spears? You couldn't wield a sword for a quarter glass yet, none of you. Get that up, recruit, higher. That's right. Thought you were strong, didn't you? And you're all as weak as newborn lambs. Look at you sweat. Seeger was a gnarly, dried-up old man who looked old enough to be anyone's grandfather. Pax had begun to doubt they would ever get to see real swords. Week after week they swung the hawks, over, under, sideways. And then one day they arrived to find practice swords laid out, wooden and blunted, but swords. Seeger stood behind the row of swords like a potter behind his wares. Today, he said, we find out who's making a warrior. File 1, come forward. Pax led her file out of formation. All right, file leader, are you ready to face a sword today? Pax took a deep breath of excitement. Yes, Arms Master. Seeger glared at her. Ha! Eager, are you? You innocents are all too willing to shed your blood. Very well. Pick up the first one in line. Yes, that one. Pax could not help grinning, a sword in her hand at last. She waggled it from side to side. No! Roared Seeger. Don't play with it, fool! It's not a toy to show off. A sword is to kill people with. Nothing less. Paksenarrion blushed scarlet. Now, hold it just like a hawk in position 1. Yes. Seeger scooped up one of the other practice blades. This is an infantry sword, short enough not to get in the way in formation. It's used to stab and slash. Now, file leader, the motions are the same for the hawk drill. Proceed. Pax was puzzled but willing. and began to move the sword through the remembered sequences. As she did so, Seeger's blade met hers, tapping it first lightly, then harder. Pax began to watch his blade, thinking back to Jornath's sketchy lessons, forgot all about the sequence of the hawk drill. Excitement rose in her, and she began to swing the blade harder, trying to force Seeger's blade aside. Suddenly, his sword was not there to be tapped, instead rapping her sharply on the ribs. Ouch! She was startled, and having lost her rhythm, was whacked twice more before she regained it. Uncertain and a bit angry, she glared at Seeger, who gave her a mocking smile. "That was the flat of the blade," he said cheerfully. "Next time it'll be the edge. Keep to the drill, recruit." Pax bit her lip, but returned to the drill pattern, meeting Seeger's blade with a crisp smack. He increased the pace, and she struggled to keep up, irritated by his smile and by the snide remarks of Corin behind her. Again, Seeger rapped her ribs, sore now from the earlier blows, and Pax erupted furiously into wild strokes that hit nothing, until a sharp blow in the midsection knocked the wind out of her, and she dropped the sword and sprawled painfully on the ground. Corin laughed. "Always a mistake to get angry," said Seeger over her head. "You've a lot to learn before trading killing blows. Catch your breath now." His voice chilled. "As for you, recruit, thinks it's funny, we'll have you next, if you please." Pax gasped a moment or two and clambered up. "Still want to learn swordplay?" Seeger asked. "Yes, sir. It's harder than it looks, though." Seeger grinned. "It always is, recruit. It always is. Now you've been blooded, I want you to put on a banda next time." He jerked his head towards the pile of white objects like cushions. "Not you," he added as Corin moved towards the pile. "I want to see if you think it's funny when I whack your ribs." Corin glared at him and snatched up his sword with practiced ease. "Ah ha ha, an expert, is it? You've handled a blade before?" Corin nodded. "We'll see then. You need not confine yourself to the hawk drill if you think you can do more." But Corin began with the standard movements, holding his sword easily. "I'd say you were used to a longer blade, recruit," commented Seeger. Abruptly, Corin changed from the drill pattern, and a complicated rattle of blade on blade resulted. Pax could not see just what had happened. Corin tried a quick thrust, but the short sword did not reach to Seeger, and Seeger's blade rapped Corin's shoulder. Corin scowled and pressed his attack again, using his height and longer reach, but he could not touch the arms master, who kept up a running commentary. "Taught by a fencing master, weren't you? You thrust better than a slash. You handle that blade like you did most of your fighting in alleys. It won't do for us. You might as well forget it, recruit, and start learning it right." And with that, Seeger began a furious attack that forced Corin back, and back, and back around the practice ring, taking blow after blow until Corin lost his grip and the sword flew out of his hand. Etha caught it in midair. "Now," said Seeger, the point of his sword at Corin's waist, "is it quite as funny when it happens to you? Let's hear you laugh." Corin was white with rage, breathless and sweaty. "Sir," he said finally. Seeger gave him a slight smile and nodded. "Novices that have never handled a sword, them I expect to get drunk on the excitement and do something stupid, and I thump them well for it. But those who claim to know something, go wait your turn again, recruit." Each one of them went around with Seeger without protection, and each received a complement of bruises. Then he showed them how to fasten the bandas, the quilted canvas surcoat worn for weapons practice. "Your turn again," Seeger said to Pax. "Ready? Are you sore enough?" Pax grinned. "I'm sore, sir, but I'm ready, I hope." "You'd better be, and I'll start with the drill." This time Pax handled the sword with more assurance and kept the cadence as even as she could. "Better," admitted Seeger, "painfully slow, but better. Speed it up now, just a little. Keep the rhythm." The blades clacked together. Again, again, again. Now, a bit harder, not too much at once. The shock of contact was making Pax's hand tingle. Her arm began to tire. Seeger shifted around her, and she had to turn and strike at the same time. The ache spread up her arm. Whack, whack. Sweat trickled down her face, stinging in her eyes. Seeger moved the other way, and Pax turned with him, but she lost the rhythm. Quick as a snake's tongue, his blade tapped her ribs. "Enough," he said. "You're slowing down again. Give the blade to someone else and go work with the hawks a while." Once they began drilling with wooden blades, they also began to learn other weapons. By the time they marched south, Seeker said, they would have a certain minimum proficiency with sword, short sword, dagger, bow, and spear. The spear offered the most difficulty. As usual, it had seemed simple, just thinking about it. A long pole with a sharp end to be poked at the enemy. No fancy strokes. Simple. Effective. Surely it was easier than a sword. If nothing else, you could hang on to the thing with both hands. We don't use polearms often, said Stammel. We're a fast-moving, flexible infantry, and swords are better for that. But we do train with them, and we use them sometimes. So, first you'll learn to carry something that long without getting all tangled up in it. Remember, those reeds we gathered last week you were so curious about? Well, they've been drying in the store lofts, and you'll each take one. Soon they were back in formation, each with a 12-foot reed in hand. Stammel had shown them how to hold the mock spears upright. Now he gave the command to move forward. 5 of the reeds tipped backwards. The butt on one tripped the recruit in front of the careless carrier. When he stumbled, his reed swung out of control and hit the file leader on the head. Pick him up. Don't stop. Come on. You've got to hold them firmly. Don't let them waver. Keep in formation there. Stay in step, or you'll trip each other. The reeds dipped and wavered as if in a windstorm as Stammel led the unit on the far side of the parade ground. By the time he called a halt, most faces were red. Now you see what I mean. The only easy thing about spear work is how easy it is to mess up the whole formation. If you ever see one of the heavy polearm companies like Count Vladdy's, you'll see how it should be done. Now, you've got to learn how to shift those things about together, or you'll all be tangled together. So just hold them upright while practice turning in place. He called for a right face. 2 recruits let their reeds lag behind the turn, and the tips bumped neighboring reeds. No! Hold them absolutely steady when you turn. Keep them straight. Try it again. After a dizzying few minutes of facing left, right, and about, the unit could turn in place without any wavering of the reeds. Stammel wiped his face and glanced at the corporals. They were trying not to grin. Far across the parade grounds, he could see another unit practicing. It looked worse than his, he thought. Next step is the slope, he said. Don't move anything until I've explained. First, you'll put the butt a handspan behind the right foot of the man in front of you. File leaders, that's an arm span in front of you. Then, slowly tilt the reed back over your shoulder. You'll have to be careful not to let the butt slip forward. Then, your left hand grips 2 spans below the right, and you lift it onto your shoulder. That gives enough clearance in front for marching. Don't let it swing free. Use your grip to hold the butt end down. Bosk, show them how to do it. Bosk came forward and took Paksenarrion's reed from her hands. He held it upright and demonstrated the facing movements they had practiced. The end of the reed, far over his head, scarcely quivered when he turned. Then he loosened the grip and let the butt end slide toward the ground, tilting the reed as it slid so that it grounded an arm span in front of him. While his right hand steadied the shaft, his left hand reached below and lifted. The reed rose, keeping the same steep slant. When his left hand reached his right, he shifted the right quickly to the lower grip. That's the position you want, said Stammel. Now, show him how to move with it. Bosk strode forward, the reed steady on his shoulder, not wavering or dipping with his stride. When he turned, they could hear the whir at the end of as the end of the reed sliced the air. He made a square, then returned the reed to an upright position and handed it back to Pax. Ready, said Stammel. Ground the butts. Paksenarrion felt the length of reed quivering as she tried to let it slide slowly through her hands, aiming the butt somewhat ahead of her right foot. It bumped the ground. It's too close to you, said Bosk. Slide it out further. Pax slid the butt along the ground until Bosk nodded. Now, tilt him back along your shoulders, said Stammel. Pax let the top of the reed fall back slowly. The butt came off the ground, but she pushed it back before anyone said anything. Some were not so lucky. Stammel and the corporals were yelling at those who let the reeds get out of control. At last, all were in the correct position. "Left hand down," said Stammel, "and lift, but keep it under control." "No!" he roared. Pax heard a smack and a yelp of pain as someone's reed landed on someone's head. Her own wavered as she tried to shift the grip of her left hand. "Steady!" Pax let her eyes slide sideways to see how others in the front rank were doing. Everyone seemed to be in the right position. "Now, bring them back vertical again. That's right. Now slip them back. No! No! Control it! Don't let it get away from you." They repeated this exercise again and again until the whole unit could shift the reeds from vertical to sloped positions without getting out of position. Paksenarrion's arms ached, and her palms tingled unpleasantly when the reed slid back and forth. "We're going to march back with them at a slope," said Stammel, "and you'd best not look foolish as the other units, either. Anyone who drops a reed..." He scowled at them. They managed to make it back to the courtyard before the others, without dropping anything but sweat. By the time the other units were in and halted, their own reeds were safely on the ground. Gradually, their weapon skills improved. They took fewer, but never no, thumps from Seeger, and the spear seemed more manageable. After Pax took the skin off the inside of her left arm during archery practice, she learned to keep her elbow braced correctly. They all suffered a variety of lumps, cuts, and scrapes, but the only serious injury in Pax's unit was Mikkel Thalson, who fell from the wall while working on repairs and broke both legs. He recovered, but with a bad limp, and eventually went to work in the armory. "He was lucky not to lose either leg," said Devlin. "That was as nasty a break as I've seen." Pax shuddered, remembering the white ends of bone sticking out. "If there'd been a marshal here," began Effa. Devlin interrupted. "No, don't say that. Not here. Not in this company." Effa looked puzzled. "But I thought Thielen's company recruited mostly Gertzmen, doesn't it?" "Once it did, but not now." "But when I joined and said I was a human, Stammel said it was good." "Sergeant Stammel to you, and yes, we're glad to get Gertzmen. The more the better, but there'll be no marshals here, and no Granger Barton." "But why, Effa, leave be." Arnie tapped her arm. "It's not our concern." It was not in Effa's nature to leave be. She worried the question any time the corporals and Stammel were not around, wondering why and why not, and trying to convert those, such as Paksenarrion, Sabin, and Arnie, who seemed to her virtuous but unenlightened. Pax found these attempts at conversion annoying. "I've got my own gods," she said finally, "and that's enough for me. My family has followed the same gods for generations, and I won't change. Besides, however good a fighter Gerd was, he can't have turned into a god. That's not where gods come from." And she turned her back on Effa and walked off. Meanwhile, she and Sabin and Vic discussed religions in a very different way, fascinated by each other's background. "Now, my family," said Sabin, "we were horse nomads once. My father's grandfather. Now we raise cattle, but we still carry a bit of hoof with us and dance under the forelock and tail at weddings and funerals." "Do you worship, horses?" asked Vic. "No, of course not. We worship Thunder of Horses, the North Wind, and the dark-eyed Mare of Plenty, though my father says that's really the same as Ilyana, the Lady of Peace. And then my uncle's family, I've seen them dance to Gulflack. The hunter? Yeah, my father always goes home then. He doesn't improve." "I should think not," Vic shivered. "City boy," teased Pax. "We gather the sheep in from the wild hunt, but we know Guthlack has great power." "I know that. It's what power? Brr." "Now, in my family, we worship the High Lord, Alyana, and Surtig and Adian." "Who are they?" asked Pax. "Surtig's the maker. Surely you know that. Craftsmen follow him. Adian is the namer, true namer, of all things. My father's a harper, and harpers deal much with names." "You're a harper's son?" asked Sabin. Vic nodded. "But you've no voice at all." "True enough," said Vic, shrugging, "and no skill with a harp either, though I had one in my hands as soon as I could pluck a string. My father tried to make a scribe of me, and I wrote as badly as I played, and got into trouble liking to fight, so..." He looked at his hands. "So I became wise for me to move away and make use of a skill I did have. Which is? Asked Sabin slyly. In an instant, Rick had turned, gotten his hold, and flipped Sabin onto his back, throwing down great lummoxes of cattle farmers for one. Sabin laughed and rolled back up into a sitting position. I see your point, he said cheerfully. But will it work against 1,000 southern spearmen? It won't have to. You and Pax will be up front, you lucky tall ones, and you can protect me. After several weeks of switching places and formation, they received their permanent assignments. Permanent until you do something stupid, Busk said. Pax, to her delight, was made file leader. She still had problems with Corin, who teased and pestered her whenever the corporals weren't around. But aside from that, she had returned to her early pleasure of being in an army. She did wish that brawling were not forbidden. She was sure she could flatten Corin and ached for a chance. But after the formal punishment of 3 recruits from Keffer's unit who had livened a dull rainy afternoon by starting a fight, she was determined to keep her temper. She did not want to lose her new position. One afternoon, a troop of soldiers in the Duke's colors rode up from the southeast and were passed by the gate guards into the courtyard. The 15 men, under command of a yellow-haired corporal, were immensely impressive to the recruits, and they knew it and swaggered accordingly. Get the quartermaster, the corporal ordered a recruit from another unit, and the recruit scurried away. Paksenarrion, taking her turn at cut and thrust practice with Seeger, was tempted to turn and look, but the armmaster brought her attention back with a thump on the ribs. When you're fighting, fight, he said grumpily. You be gazing around at everything on earth and heaven, and you'll make buzzard bait soon enough. Pax concentrated on trying to slash past his defenses, but the old man was more than a match for her, and talked on without a break as she grew more and more breathless. Now that's too wide a backswing. What'd I tell ya? See, you left your left side open again. Somebody will plant a blade in there when you're careless. Quicker, lass, quicker. You ought to be quicker nor an old man like me. Look now, I gave you an opening wide as a barn door for a thrust, and you used that same wide cut. Stop now. Pax lowered her wooden blade, gasping for breath. You're strong enough, Seeger said, but strong's not the whole game. You've got to be quick, and you've got to think as fast as you move. Now, let's break the thrust stroke down into its parts again. He demonstrated, then had Pax go through the motion several times. Let's try that again. Don't stand flat-footed. You need to move. This time practice seemed to go more smoothly, and at last, Pax's blade slipped past his to touch his side. Aha, he said. That's it. Twice more that afternoon, she got a touch on him, and was rewarded with one of his rare smiles. But you still must be quicker, was his party comment. End of chapter 2.